This is exactly what I was talking about. You need to close this road.
Sir, you need to step back and let us handle this.
Sound of a gentle, slow guitar riff playing under a light. Melancholic rain. It wasn't much. Just a chunk of reclaimed oak, maybe 3 feet high, that I'd sealed and carved myself, hand-painted the words in bold, slightly sloppy black. Blind curve, kill zone, slow way down. I drove that post, into the muddy shoulder maybe 4 feet from the drainage ditch where her Seddon finally stopped rolling. 7 years ago, right outside our little patch of land on Red Pine Road, where the county road didn't just curve, it snapped back like a tired rubber band. Blind, tight, especially when the damp came in off the river. They never put up a real sign. Why would they? Nobody official had died there until Alara. She was driving home late from her shift at the clinic, exhausted, rain coming down in sheets. They said she swerved, overcorrected. I didn't need the police report, man. I lived here. I'd seen that bend cause enough near misses, enough gut-dropping moments to know exactly what took her. I was nobody important then. Just a man with too much silence in his throat, and a son, Orion, who needed a father more than I needed to grieve. So I mixed my own concrete, planted that sign deep, 2 feet down, under a bruised blood-orange sky, while Orion, who was only 10, stood silent, holding the beam of a cheap flashlight. We didn't say a word, didn't need to. That sign wasn't just a warning, it was a headstone. It was love, grief, and purpose hammered into oak. Sound of an engine slowing down, then a friendly car horn beep. And for years, nobody touched it. People slowed, neighbors nodded thanks. It gave me a quiet piece of my soul back, knowing it might save a life. Even if it couldn't save hers, then the HOA came for us. When we bought the place, this stretch was outside any jurisdiction. We were technically grandfathered in, just past the boundary of the Glen at Meadowbrook. But things shift, developments push, new board members redraw the lines. And suddenly, I was trapped inside the Glen's perimeter, a resident without a vote but definitely under their thumb. They called it unifying aesthetics, preserving property value, visual continuity and branding. I called it control. The first letter arrived in a tidy envelope, a silver maple leaf embossed on navy blue. Inside, dear resident, your structure is a direct violation of Meadowbrook's visual standards and landscape cohesion requirements. You must remove it within 14 days to avoid penalty. Sound of paper crumpling lightly. I called the number, voicemail. Wrote an email, no reply. So I showed up at the next board meeting. Sat through 90 minutes of talk about pool codes and some woman complaining about Christmas lights in March. When they finally gave me the floor, I held up a photo of Alara. The mangled wreckage. The curve. I told them everything. The woman at the head of the polished table, Veronica Crane, the president, clasped her hands like she was praying. Voiceover, Veronica. Flat, polite tone. I am so sorry for your loss, Mr. Jennings, truly. But we still have to follow the standards. Otherwise, we make exceptions for everyone. The treasurer, a smug little weasel named Gavin Poole, added with this tiny, condescending smirk. Voiceover, Gavin. Dismissive. Besides, it's been 7 years. Haven't been any other reported accidents there, right? I couldn't even breathe. They voted 5-0 to uphold the violation. Back home, Orion, 17 now, came out, sat beside me, offered me a cold ginger ale. He remembered planting that sign. He remembered why. Voiceover, Daniel Lowe, quiet. They can't take it, kid. Not without a fight. I appealed, attached weather data, police reports, sworn statements from neighbors, even an old county email admitting the curve was high risk but deprioritized due to budget constraints. Reply, appeal, denied. Final notice, remove by June 3rd, or we will, and the cost will be charged to your property account. Charged to me. For destroying my wife's memorial. I considered chaining myself to it, calling the news, but I didn't think they'd move so fast. I didn't know June 3rd meant June 3rd at 9:06 a.m. That morning I was upstairs, wrestling with a broken closet handle, when Orion screamed, "Dad! They're out front!" 2 HOA maintenance trucks. 2 guys in reflective vests. One was already walking toward the sign with a pry bar. I ran out barefoot, the porch steps stinging my feet. "Stop! That sign's not hurting anyone." The worker barely glanced at me, just his clipboard. "Just doing what we're told, pal." He yanked once, then twice. The concrete cracked. The post gave way. The other man tossed the oak sign into the bed of the truck like it was scrap wood. They climbed in, doors slammed, and they peeled out, and then, barely 5 minutes later, the sound came. Tires screaming, a horn blaring, then that sickening wet crunch of metal folding. Orion and I spun around. Down the street just past the curve. Smoke was curling into the damp morning air. A white HOA security SUV was crumpled against the side of a dark sedan. Voiceover. Daniel, bitter, whispering. You took away the warning. And now look. The flashing blue and red lights arrived 10 minutes later. Deputies, fire, ambulances, and another HOA security vehicle. And then, here comes Veronica Crane, rolling up in her sleek black BMW, stepping out in heels too high for the gravel shoulder, her HOA badge swinging like a mocking pendulum. She didn't look at the wreck first. She looked at me. Voiceover. Veronica. Cold. Prosecutorial. Did you see what happened? Voiceover. Daniel challenging. I heard it. After your guys tore down my sign, her eyes narrowed. Voiceover. Veronica. Condescending. You are not seriously suggesting that sign, that homemade piece of wood, would have prevented this. I didn't answer because I was suggesting exactly that. The curve was barely visible unless you knew it was coming. That was the whole point. Alara didn't know, and neither apparently did the driver of that sedan. I found out later the security driver fractured his collarbone. The other driver had it worse, the man in the black Charger. He was an undercover officer with State Patrol, Sergeant Matthew Keller. Routine surveillance. They loaded him into the ambulance, face streaked with blood, neck braced in rigid foam. Voiceover. Daniel. A slow, dark realization. And I knew. The game just changed. The HOA, of course, doubled down. An email arrived at 6:17 a.m. the next day, full of corporate speak. Unauthorized road sign previously placed by a homeowner may have contributed to confusion regarding appropriate signage. Private installation of visual elements near public roadways presents liability risks and visual dissonance. They implied I had caused confusion. Orion read it over my shoulder. They're trying to blame you, Dad. I nodded. They are. Voiceover. Orion, worried. I know they can't, right? I didn't answer. Because the truth was, they could try. They had attorneys, insurance, power. I had a faded folder of old crash data, and a son who deserved to watch his father fight back. Sound of a sharp clicking pen and keyboard typing. I pulled out my old file folder. The one I hadn't looked at since Alara's crash. Accident photos, skid mark measurements, her autopsy summary. Inside, I found an old letter from the county traffic office acknowledging the danger of the curve years ago. That was Exhibit A. Then I dug out my old thumb drives, the dashcam footage, the near misses I'd recorded. I drove straight to the State Patrol office, left my name, my number, and a USB drive with all the footage. 3 days of silence. Then a thick certified letter from a local law firm, Gavin Poole's cousin, no doubt. It threatened civil litigation and demanded immediate payment for damages, $4,200 to the HOA. They were suing me. I called my old mentor, Greg Martinez, retired State Patrol investigator, voiceover. Daniel. Determined. They're trying to corner me. Greg, voiceover. Greg, gravelly, warm. Then we make them regret it. Danny, bring everything you've got. Greg arrived the next day. We spent 6 hours reconstructing both crashes, Alara's and the HOA's. He measured the slope, the curvature, mapped the sight lines with his drone. You were right to post a warning, he said flatly. Anyone with half a brain would have. Sound of drone taking off, wind noise. We logged everything. That night, I sent the drone footage to Teresa, the civil engineer. I labeled the evidence Exhibit C, preventable sequence breakdown. The next call was the one that mattered. A voice like gravel and iron, voiceover. Sergeant Keller, weary but firm. This is Sergeant Matthew Keller. I reviewed the footage. I've also been informed the HOA is attempting to place partial liability on your previous signage. That won't happen, I froze. Excuse me? Voiceover. Sergeant Keller, absolute. I don't forget who saves lives, Mr. Jennings, and I don't forgive people who gamble with them. I'm authoring a statement, official. Your wife's sign did its job until they decided it didn't matter. With that, the tide began to turn. Sergeant Keller, limping slightly, showed up at my kitchen table 2 days later. He spoke to Orion, knew Alara, in fact, who had patched him up once. He pulled out a departmental form. Voiceover, Sergeant Keller, focused. I'm making a referral to the county district attorney's office. The HOA board's removal of a visible functioning safety sign, especially after being informed of prior incidents, constitutes at minimum negligent endangerment. He confirmed the timeline. Clean, provable, sequential, no gaps. The very next week, I filed a FOIA request, drafted a legal affidavit, and submitted it all with the help of a paralegal friend. Every word was a nail, every photo a brick in the wall of truth. I was no longer defending myself. I was prosecuting them. Then the formal letter came from the HOA, slid under my door after sunset, signed with Veronica Crane's smug cursive flourish. Your disregard for visual uniformity and roadway guidelines poses an ongoing risk to our community. We are issuing a cease and desist order against any future signage placement. Voiceover, Orion, flat, shocked. They're blaming you for confusing the driver by trying to help people not die. Voiceover, Daniel, calm, dangerous. It's not just misdirection. It's calculated. They're trying to make me look like the one who introduced uncertainty. That night, Greg and I returned to the curve. We calculated how much time my sign had bought drivers. Voiceover, Daniel, quiet, pointing at a pause screen. See that? That's the moment. That's where the sign would have given the driver 4 more seconds. 4 seconds to brake, 4 seconds to avoid impact, sound of a gavel hitting wood, then the heavy doors of a courtroom opening. The courtroom smelled like old wood and fresh nerves. Across the aisle, Veronica Crane wore a blazer that tried too hard to look innocent. My attorney, Rachel Vance, stood tall. Voiceover, Rachel Vance, sharp, confident. This case is not about a sign, Your Honor. It's about deliberate indifference, about a board that saw a grieving homeowner's plea for safety as an eyesore, and prioritized visual uniformity over human life. She clicked the remote. The projection screen showed Sergeant Keller's dashcam footage, the curve approaching fast. No warning. Impact. The sound was sickening. She brought up the documents. Exhibit B, the board minutes dismissing signage requests. Exhibit D, the removal order signed by Veronica. Exhibit E, Keller's sworn statement. Voiceover, Rachel Vance concluding. The board removed a known safety measure without replacing it. They knew the curve was dangerous, and yet they chose to prioritize visual uniformity over human life. The judge, Marshall, called a recess. 5 minutes later, she returned. Voiceover, Judge Marshall, firm, decisive. This court finds sufficient evidence of gross negligence and a consistent pattern of retaliatory conduct on behalf of the Grove at Meadowbrook HOA Board. The plaintiff's case may proceed to full trial or negotiated settlement. Karen's lawyer asked for a sidebar. The room shifted. The air came back into people's lungs. The settlement terms were read aloud. The HOA would pay full damages and legal costs. A public apology, permanent professionally installed signage at the curve with county oversight, and, the most satisfying part, Veronica Crane was ousted with 84% of the community vote. Gavin Poole resigned. 2 weeks later, a flatbed truck rolled up to Red Pine Road. It carried a professional, reflective, double-posted warning sign, dangerous curve, reduce speed. They installed it exactly where mine used to be. Sound of heavy machinery, followed by the soft echoing sound of a metal bolt being tightened. Orion and I stood on the shoulder. Voiceover. Orion. Soft. They did it. Voiceover. Daniel. Correcting gently. We did it. The new board approved a small plaque at the base, embedded in the concrete with bronze lettering. This safety installation is dedicated to Alara Jennings, who lost her life on this road. May her memory keep others safe. Peace, it turns out, isn't a finish line. It's Lucas walking home from school, rounding that curve without looking over his shoulder. It's knowing that Alara's name still means something, not because of how she died, but because of what came after. Sound of the gentle, slow guitar riff from the beginning returning, played slightly faster, more resolved. HOAs were never supposed to be kingdoms, man. They were meant to be communities. And when one forgets that, it takes just one person to remind them. Sometimes that reminder is a voice. Sometimes it's a lawsuit. Sometimes it's a sign, but always, always, it starts with someone refusing to be buried. Call to action. Have you ever faced a petty power struggle with an HOA or a bureaucracy that threatened your safety or well-being? Did you fight back or did you let it go? The comment section is open. Tell us your story. What is the line between community order and personal freedom? And who should pay the price when that line is crossed? Let me know your take. Like, subscribe, and share this story with anyone who needs to hear that sometimes the fight for safety starts with a simple piece of wood.